Okay, we're back, and as I said, I'm going to try and do my best to go through this and just read it again. And this is the record of the orally transmitted teachings translated by Burton Watson, okay? And I'm going to begin with page 1X, or Roman numeral 9. It's the foreword. There's really nothing other than the table of contents prior to that. We're going to start from the beginning, and we're going to go through and go through and go through until we have finished it again. All right? This is a foreword from Daisaku Ikeda that I believe was, I don't have it dated. I'm sure it'll be mentioned here somewhere along the line. At any rate, here's the story of how this book got written, frankly speaking. I view with the greatest pleasure the publication of this English translation of the Ongikudan, or the record of the orally transmitted teachings by Dr. Burton Watson, a translator of world renown, for it will introduce to the world at large the essence of East Asian Buddhism. Now that's why I'm reading this, because it will only introduce it to the world at large if it's studied. And so far it hasn't been focused on. So I want to focus on it, okay, because I do understand it. Continuing, Dr. Watson is widely known for his deep understanding of Chinese literature and his translations of the Sima Qian's records of the historian and of Chinese poetry. We first met in 1973, the year I got Gohonzon. I had for some time thought of him as the most suitable person to undertake a translation of the Lotus Sutra, and I expressed the hope that he would one day gratify us with a translation done from Kumera Jiva's Chinese version of the text. I was, of course, aware that there were already a number of English translations of the sutra. My hope, however, was that he would produce a translation marked by stylistic beauty, one that would do justice to the literary qualities of the text and at the same time be easily understood by readers not familiar with Buddhism, just as Kumera Jiva's translation is used by everybody in China as a result of its clarity and, again, poetic symmetry. Dr. Watson, having agreed to my proposal, fulfilled his promise 20 years later with the publication of his translation of the Lotus Sutra. It has proved a major event in the history of world Buddhism, a powerful beacon of light to the future, a powerful beacon to light the future of humankind. In 1992, the year before Dr. Watson's translation of the Lotus Sutra appeared, I met with him again. We talked about the Ongikudan, the record of the orally transmitted teachings, which embodies Nichiren's comments on the Lotus Sutra. Dr. Watson, who by this time had completed his translation of the sutra itself, expressed a deep interest in the manner in which Nichiren interpreted it, in the manner that Nichiren interpreted it. Aware of the many problems involved, he agreed nevertheless to undertake an English translation of the Ongikudan as well. Now, a fitting adornment to his long career as a translator, his translation of this text is being published. I am confident that it will open up to the world the profound philosophical teachings of Buddhism and act as a joyous revelation to all humankind. Numerous persons throughout the world who seek a deeper understanding of Buddhism have heard of the Ongikudan, but only a few have had a glimpse of its contents. Many have expressed a strong desire to learn more about the text and have long wished for an English translation. On the occasion of the publication of this translation, I would like here to say a brief word about my own understanding of the Ongikudan. As I recall, it was the August of 1962 when I began a series of lectures on the Ongikudan designed for college-level students who were members of the Soka Gakkai. I wanted to train future leaders of the movement and to make the profound philosophy of Nichiren accessible in contemporary terms. Pardon me. It was a time of nuclear armament and age engulfed in hatred and mistrust, and I felt that there was a deep need to replace these with a humanism based on mutual trust and harmony. Generally speaking, Buddhism is viewed as an exploration of the inner world of the individual. Generally speaking, Buddhism is viewed as an exploration of the inner world of the individual, focusing mainly upon meditation and the observance of religious precepts or rules. And in fact, it has largely ignored the question of how these inner concerns of the individual can be applied to the outer world of society as a whole. Therefore, few people perceive Buddhism as a philosophy for the attainment of world peace. Nichiren, however, as he demonstrated, as he proved in his famous work on establishing the correct teaching for the peace of the land, postulated a foundational truth or principle that a revelation beginning within the inner being of the individual can then bring about a similar revolution in the world at large. Basing himself upon the Lotus Sutra, Nichiren did not look to some external being such as a Buddha or the gods as the source of this revolution in the individual and in society. Instead, he perceived a law or truth that permeated both the inner being of the individual and the life force of the universe as a whole, and sought to open up and dismantle and disseminate an understanding of that truth. Pardon me one moment. Oh, God, I love this. Instead, he perceived a law or truth that permeates both the inner being of the individual and the life force of the universe as a whole, and sought to open up and disseminate an understanding of that truth. But this concept far transcended the ordinary thinking of the age in which he lived. And as a result, as the Lotus Sutra itself had predicted, he could not fail but encounter numerous grave difficulties. And indeed, the very fact that he endured such difficulties in the course of propagating the sutra was proof of the correctness of its teachings, and at the same time evidence that he was, as it were, reading the Lotus Sutra with his whole being, that he was a true votary of the Lotus Sutra. In later years, when Nichiren retired to Mount Minobu, he delivered a series of lectures on the Lotus Sutra for the instruction of his disciples. He revealed the hidden meanings of the sutra passages that were so familiar to him, the meanings that earlier authorities on the sutra, such as the great teacher Tentai and the great teacher Myolo, had not fully brought to light. Nichiren, utilizing the work of these earlier commentators in his own lectures on the sutra, proceeded to make clear these hidden meanings. His lectures were recorded and compiled by his disciple Nikko, Nikko, one of his closest disciples. Nichiren gave his approval to the work, whose completion is recorded as the first day of the first month of the first year of the Koan era, which corresponds to the year 1278. It later came to be known as the Ongikuden, or the record over the orally transmitted teachings. The charge is often made that the Lotus Sutra, though abounding in highly vivid similes and parables, lacks philosophical content. If we look only at its surface meaning, we may perhaps agree with such an opinion. But Buddhism customarily applies three approaches in interpreting its writings, examining them first from the standpoint of the words of the text, then from that of the ideas or meaning implied by the words, and finally from that of the underlying purport or the purpose of the work. Going on to page 12, Roman numeral 12. Chinese authorities in the foreword of the record of the orally transmitted teachings. Record of Chinese authorities on the Lotus Sutra, such as Tiantai and Miolo, by pondering the words of the sutra, had derived from them certain subtle ideas or doctrines, which they described in terms such as the mutual possession of the 10 worlds, the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, the attainment of Buddhahood in the remote past, opening the near and revealing the distant, or the replacement of the 3 vehicles with the 1 vehicle. But their commentaries had as yet not brought to light the underlying purpose or import of the Lotus Sutra. Nichiren, in his lectures on the sutra, revealed that the purport or the purpose or heart of the work is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, of the Lotus Sutra is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. And from that standpoint, he proceeded to give his explication of the sutra as a whole, why it's there, what it says, what that really means in the age that we live in. This may be termed an interpretation based on his observation of the mind or the inner truth implicit in the text, and it constitutes a philosophy of profound depth. Nichiren, in effect, infused new life into the Lotus Sutra. Nichiren, in effect, taught us how to bring forth our Buddhahood and be the Buddhas that can understand this teaching very simply and have the ability to explain it to other people in a way that they can understand it, put it to use, even if it's over their head. All right? I'm going to read that whole paragraph is bold, so I know it was important. Nichiren, in his lectures on the sutra, revealed that the purport or the heart of the work is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, of the Lotus Sutra. And from that standpoint, he proceeded to give his explication of the sutra as a whole, what we're about to read. This may be termed an interpretation based on his observation of the mind or the inner truth implicit in the text, and it constitutes a philosophy of profound depth. Nichiren, in effect, infused new life into the Lotus Sutra because it's the latter day of the law. It's time. It's time for widespread propagation. The record of the orally transmitted teachings begins with an explication of the term Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. It then proceeds to cite passages in each of the 28 chapters of the Lotus Sutra, in some cases first introducing quotations from commentaries of Tiantai or Miolo on these passages, in other cases proceeding directly to Nichiren's interpretation, which, as mentioned earlier, is based upon his observations of the mind. It comes from the mind of Nichiren, which is why we try to connect and have the same mind as Nichiren. Okay? The work concludes with commentary on key passages from 2 short sutras, the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra and the Universal Worthy Sutra, that have traditionally been regarded as prologue and epilogue, respectively, to the Lotus Sutra, and 3 together known as the Threefold Lotus Sutra. In all, orally transmitted teachings contains commentary on a total of 231 passages. Furthermore, there are 2 additional sections, which I just completed a few days ago. What is the basic philosophical outlook of the orally transmitted teachings? Various interpretations are possible. But in my view, it is that ultimately it resides in the concept of the dignity of the human being and the dignity of life, the inherent Buddha nature of all things. In specific terms, it is a belief that ordinary people are capable of attaining Buddhahood because it's inherent in their life, that ordinary people are in fact Buddhas. So President Koide and I agree completely on that. We say it constantly. In most religions, human beings are relegated to a level quite inferior to that of the sacred being or beings of the faith. But in a religion like Buddhism, whose basic mission is to elevate men and women to the highest plane of spiritual attainment, human beings are referred to rather as children of the gods, or children of the Buddha. Terminology that reflects the religion's very reason for existing is to elevate everybody to become Buddhas exactly as they are in their present form, not in a future lifetime. Pardon me, I have to clear my sinuses quickly. I know that was very rude, especially if you're Japanese, but I'm not going to be able to keep reading this if I don't do that. Pardon me. All right. This fact is most clearly indicated in the following passage from the orally transmitted teachings. In the lifespan chapter of the Lotus Sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha reveals that he attained Buddhahood in the far distant past, numberless major world system, dust particle kalpas. So he says, it has been immeasurable, boundless, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, millions of nayutas of kalpas, he explains, since I, in fact, attained Buddhahood. From the Lotus Sutra on page 225, and this is again always the first translation that Mr. Watson did of the Lotus Sutra, not the threefold Lotus Sutra. Well, that page will only align with the first translation, for those of you that want to go look it up. Ordinarily, one would, of course, take the I in this utterance to refer to Shakyamuni himself. But Nichiren declares that the I refers to the living beings of the Dharma realm, to each and every one of the 10 worlds, from hell to Buddhahood. He is saying that all beings in the 10 worlds of existence have from the beginning been Buddhas. One ought suppose that this is a statement of mere abstract principle. But Nichiren goes on to say, now Nichiren and his followers who chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo are the original lords of teaching of the lifespan chapter. So I'm fully capable of doing what I'm doing right now. From page 126 of the orally transmitted teachings, chapter 16, I think is point 3, if it's not point 2. That is, anyone who chants the Daimoku, regardless of who that person may be, and I've experienced this personally myself, that is anyone who chants the Daimoku, regardless of the person, of who that person may be, can perceive that he or she has from the beginning been a Buddha. In this way, he demonstrates, thank you, dear. In this way, he demonstrates the concrete application of his earlier statement. So it's actualized. It's no longer theoretical because we're the actual proof of it being real. Okay, continuing on page 12, bottom. Thus, in a simple and straightforward pronouncement, he states the principle that ordinary people are identical with the Buddha, identical with himself. Because we always obey, we qualify to be able to teach and preach. We're the bodhisattvas of the earth of Nichiren. I'll say it again. Thus, in a simple and straightforward pronouncement, he states the principle that ordinary people are identical with the Buddha. That's not an arrogant thing to say if you're a disciple of Nichiren. This is his position. This is the position you must then reflect in your outlook. The view of human beings is one of the most outstanding characteristics of the orally transmitted teachings. It's the whole reason this is such an important writing. It makes that fact not a deniable or needing any verification. What you experience in your daily life practicing is exactly what he's describing here as we go forward. Or at least that's been my experience. I haven't found that much of a difference other than I'm not quite Nichiren Daishonin or Daisaku Ikeda, but every other point that they're making corresponds to my life as much as it does to theirs. And I validated that with my own life. But then there is the problem of human suffering. It would not be too much to say that all human life is, in a sense, a battle, a trial of endurance. As Tolstoy has written, all happy families are alike, but an unhappy family is unhappy after its own fashion. In life, we are buffeted by a veritable storm of troubles, the death of kin, pronouncements of incurable disease, bankruptcy, job loss, dissension in the family. This is the true nature of life. And for that reason, people turn to the teachings of the Lotus Sutra in hope of finding some safety in the midst of such realities for the peace and security of their present existence that the Lotus Sutra promises. But if such ills condemn human beings to unhappiness, then we would have to conclude that the happy human being exists only in fantasy, and that's not true. We can become the enlightened Buddhas, the joyful, regardless of what's going on, individuals that we have the potential with the wisdom to perceive the truth to become. Nichiren himself lived a life marked by repeated troubles in order to prepare us for what we would also endure for the sake of the law. Nichiren himself lived a life marked by repeated troubles and hardship. Twice condemned to exile, faced with execution, attacked by warriors and ruffians, subjected to abuse and slander. Again and again, his very existence was in danger. His was a life far removed from the peace and security described in the Lotus Sutra. And for that very reason, many people doubted that Nichiren was in fact the kind of votary of the Lotus Sutra who faithfully carries out the sutra's injunctions. In his lectures on the Lotus Sutra, Nichiren, viewing the course of his own life and pondering the harsh realities of human existence, declared, "You should understand that when one practices the Lotus Sutra under such circumstances, difficulties will arise, and those are to be looked on as peaceful practices," from page 115 of this book. Such a statement would at first glance seem to contradict the Lotus Sutra itself. But rather than being a conclusion that contradicts the Lotus Sutra, it is one that brings to light the true meaning of the sutra, a meaning that lies deeper than the mere surface words of the text. From his words, we learn that happiness means not the absence of troubles, but rather the refusal to be defeated by them, which is the true definition of happiness. Nichiren goes on to state the Nirvana Sutra says, the varied sufferings that all living beings undergo, all these are the thus come one's own sufferings. And if we're thus come ones, there are our own sufferings as well. And Nichiren declares that these various sufferings that all living beings undergo, all these are Nichiren's own sufferings. And the bodhisattvas of the earth will share in that sentiment. That's why they're willing to not begrudge their life for the sake of propagation of the teaching. This is from page 138 of this book. He announces that he will carry out an act of great compassion, sharing the sufferings of all beings and rescuing them from these sufferings. Thinking not of himself alone, he exposes a fervent desire to bring happiness to all human beings, showing through his own being the true way for a Buddhist believer to proceed. He is my teacher. I would like also to call attention to Nichiren's comments on the Bodhisattva Never Disparaging chapter of the Lotus Sutra, an example of patience and perseverance that this Bodhisattva, the example of patience and perseverance that this Bodhisattva presents, the power of a law that seeks to save both believers and maligners alike. His practice of paying honor to the Buddha nature present in all living beings as he simply went about bowing to people. All this is a concrete demonstration of the belief that all people are capable of attaining Buddhahood. And Nichiren adopts this same practice as his own, developing it into a compassionate struggle to save all humankind through Kosen Rufu, or wide propagation of the teachings. Nichiren believed that the heart of Shakyamuni Buddha's lifetime teachings lay in the Lotus Sutra, and that the heart of the Lotus Sutra's practice lay in the never disparaging chapter. Of the Lotus Sutra's practice lay in the never disparaging chapter. In one of his letters, he writes, "What does Bodhisattva never disparaging's profound respect for peoples signify? The purpose of the appearance in this world of Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of teachings, lies in his behavior as a human being." So all of us as Buddhists, it lies in our behavior as human beings. This letter, which resounds with praise for the humanism of the Buddhist doctrine, stresses that the truth of Buddhism is to be found not in the words of the sutra alone, but in the Buddha's aims as they are revealed in his actions as a human being. Bodhisattva never disparaging bowed to persons of all kinds in order to awaken them to the reality that they all possess the Buddha nature within themselves. In doing so, he gave expression to boundless courage and a faith that could not be shaken. Nichiren, in his comments on the never disparaging chapter, lists 14 different ways in which one could look at the act of obeisance performed by the Bodhisattva as he went about bowing to the people. In one of these, he says, it is like the situation when one faces a mirror, just as it is when we're chanting Daimoku to the Gohonzon, and makes a bow of obeisance. The image in the mirror likewise makes a bow of obeisance to oneself. Here, he is pointing to a highly important moral principle that appears to be lacking in modern society, namely a spirit of mutual trust and mutual esteem, one that understands that when you show respect for others, they will show respect for you. The principal cause for the sense of alienation that besets human beings is in our present day society is egotism. Egotism, pardon me. This arrogance, okay? This is the conclusion reached in the discussions I held some years ago with the historian Dr. Arnold Toynbee. And how is one to overcome this attachment to egotism or arrogance? From a Buddhist point of view, it is to be accomplished by ridding human beings of their self-centeredness, of what Buddhism terms the fundamental darkness that enshrouds their lives. This is ignorance, a lack of awareness of the true dignity of their existences, of the fact of that their own lives are embodiments of the wonderful law, and that they themselves have from the beginning been Buddhas. And what can wipe out this ignorance is firm faith. A faith that never doubts the Buddha nature within all men and women, never doubts the dignity of their inner beings. This engendering of such faith is now humankind's greatest need, is it not? An organization of people who are spreading Nichiren's philosophy of peace and life and who share its doctrines and ideals exists at present in 190 different countries and regions of the world. The solidarity of men and women who are awakened to the true dignity of life will continue to expand and make it possible that war and terrorism be wiped out, and that poverty, destruction of the environment, and other global problems that now threaten humankind be solved. I firmly believe that the day will come, and it is I firmly believe that day will come, and my one great desire is that it may come as quickly as possible. That's why we as disciples have to propagate this teaching. In closing, I would like to express my own heartfelt wish that readers will find in this book a fountain of inexhaustible wisdom, and that it will enable them to live lives filled with boundless courage and hope. Daisaku Ikeda, that reading this book will be the beginning of them reading it again and again and again until they become the masters of their own minds and become teachers of the law. Okay, we'll stop here. That was from the beginning to page 16. We'll continue after a break.